It's 9:04 in the morning. You're standing in line at the bank. Fluorescent lights, a velvet rope that's slightly crooked, a number ticket in your hand that says 47. The screen above the counter says they're currently serving 31. Your card got declined at the gas station yesterday. Not because you're broke, because your balance dipped to $38 and the bank's fraud system flagged it as unusual activity. You've been a customer here for 6 years. Nobody comes to greet you. 60 feet away, behind a door with no sign on it, a man is being handed a coffee he didn't order his usual. Oat milk, 1 sugar by someone who knows his name, his kids' names, and the exact date his trust account rebalances every quarter. Same bank, same building, same Tuesday morning, 2 completely different countries. Here's the thing almost nobody explains to you. Banks don't actually treat everyone the same and pretend otherwise. They built an entire invisible ladder, 7 distinct rungs, and where you land on it determines whether you're a customer they serve or an asset they protect. Today, we're climbing that ladder, every rung, from $0 to 25 million. My name is John. By the end of this, you'll never look at your banking app the same way again. Let's start at the bottom, because that's where most people actually live, even if nobody admits it out loud. Picture Maria, 26, works retail. Paycheck hits Friday at midnight, and by Thursday the following week, her balance is somewhere between $4 and -11. At this level, the bank isn't really a partner. It's a machine that profits from the exact moment you run out of money. The overdraft fee hits $35. On average, nationally, the second a transaction dips her under zero. Not because the bank is confused about her situation, because that fee is a predictable, scheduled part of their revenue model. American banks collected over $5 billion in overdraft fees in a single recent year. That number didn't come from wealthy people making mistakes. It came from people like Maria, who overdraft an average of 10 times a year without even realizing there's a pattern. There is no relationship manager. There is no phone call to check in. There is an app, a support line with a 40-minute hold time, and a fee schedule buried on page 14 of a document nobody reads. This is rung 1. And here's the part that stings. The people who can least afford a $35 mistake are the ones the system is quietly built to extract it from. Now picture Derek, 29. He's finally built a cushion, a few $1,000s sitting in checking, another few in a savings account earning basically nothing. Something shifts here, but only slightly. Derek doesn't overdraft anymore. The bank stops charging him for the privilege of running out of money, but he's still invisible in every way that matters. His savings account is earning 0.01% APY, while inflation quietly erodes the value of every dollar he's not spending. He gets emails, generic ones. Have you considered a credit card with rewards? Sent to 2 million other people the same morning. If Derek calls the bank with a question, he waits on hold. If he walks into a branch, he takes a number. Same as Maria, same as everyone else in line. He is technically a slightly better customer than he was a year ago. He is still, functionally, a stranger to the institution holding his money. This is where something genuinely starts to change, and it's smaller than you'd expect. Priya just crossed $22,000 in combined checking and savings after 3 years of disciplined saving. One afternoon, a banker actually calls her. Not a script, an actual human, mentioning she might qualify for a better savings product. It's not much. It's a slightly higher interest rate, a waived monthly fee, a vague mention of premium checking if she keeps a certain balance. But something has shifted in how the bank's internal system sees her. She's crossed an invisible line most people never notice exists, the threshold where she becomes, in the bank's own risk models, worth a few extra minutes of attention. She still doesn't have a dedicated banker. She still calls a general number. But for the first time, when she calls, the hold music stops a little sooner. Somewhere around $100,000 in combined assets, the letters change. James gets one in the mail, cream-colored envelope, heavier paper stock than a bill. Inside, an invitation to meet with a personal banker, a real title, a real office, an actual name attached to an actual phone extension. For the first time, James has someone whose job includes knowing his situation. Not intimately, not personally, but there's a file with his name on it that isn't just a transaction history. He's offered something new, a relationship banking package, free wire transfers, a slightly better mortgage rate if he ever buys, access to a private banking lounge with actual couches instead of plastic chairs bolted to the floor. This is the moment most people first feel the shift, not because the bank suddenly respects him more as a human being, because the math changed. A customer with $150,000 in assets generates meaningfully more profit through fees, float, and cross-selling than a customer with $1,500. The bank isn't being kind. It's doing arithmetic. This is where the language itself changes. Personal banking becomes wealth management, and the vocabulary shift isn't cosmetic. Angela crosses $500,000 after selling a small business she spent a decade building. Within 2 weeks, she's assigned a dedicated wealth advisor, not a call center employee, an actual person with a direct line, and, remarkably, a habit of answering it. She's invited to a building most customers don't know exists. A private wing, no teller lines, no number tickets, just a receptionist who already knows her name before she says it, and an advisor waiting with 2 coffee options instead of a form to fill out. The products change too. Estate planning conversations, tax loss harvesting, access to investment opportunities that were never advertised on the bank's public website because they were never meant for the public. Angela hasn't gotten smarter about money in the last 2 weeks. The bank has simply recalculated what she's worth protecting. At this level, it stops being one relationship and becomes an entire apparatus. Meet Richard, $4 million, built slowly over 22 years, running a regional manufacturing company. He doesn't have one advisor anymore. He has a team, a wealth manager, a tax strategist, an estate attorney the bank has a working relationship with, and someone whose entire job is coordinating between all three, so Richard never has to. His bank calls him before he calls them. Quarterly reviews, unprompted. A market dips 4% on a Tuesday, and by Wednesday morning, there's already a call scheduled not to sell him something, but to walk him through exactly how it affects his specific portfolio. He's offered things that were never mentioned at any lower rung. Access to private equity deals, structured lending against his portfolio instead of selling assets, invitations to events where the guest list itself is a kind of due diligence. Everyone in the room has already been vetted by someone else's bank. Richard rarely sets foot in a branch. The branch, in a sense, comes to him. And now we're back at the beginning 60 feet from Maria's line, behind the unmarked door. His name is Walter. $18 million, most of it inherited, some of it grown. He has never waited in a line at this bank. He has, quite possibly, never seen the lobby Maria stood in this morning. His relationship manager knows his golf handicap, knows his daughter starts college in the fall and has already flagged 3 education funding structures worth discussing. Knows he prefers meetings before 10 a.m. because he plays tennis at 11. The bank doesn't wait for Walter to have a problem. It anticipates one. A tax law changes in D.C. on a Monday, and by Thursday, Walter has a personalized memo explaining exactly how it affects his specific holdings, before his own accountant has even finished reading the bill. At this level, the bank isn't really selling banking anymore. It's selling invisibility, convenience, and the quiet, permanent sense that someone else is always watching the details so Walter never has to. The overdraft fee that nearly broke Maria's week wouldn't register as a rounding error in Walter's world. He has never once been charged one. Not because he's more careful, because at his level, that fee simply doesn't exist as a category of experience. Here's what connects all 7 rungs, and it's not really about money at all. It's about risk and profit, dressed up as service. The banking industry didn't build this ladder to be cruel to Maria or generous to Walter. They built it because a customer at $38 costs more to serve than they generate, and a customer at $18 million generates more than almost anything else the bank does. The kindness you receive from a financial institution has always, quietly, been a function of your account balance, never your character, your effort, or how hard you worked to get there. This isn't a call to be angry at your bank. It's an invitation to understand the game you're actually playing. Because here's the part that should genuinely change how you operate. Every single rung on this ladder is climbable. Not through luck. Through the same boring, unglamorous behaviors we've talked about before. Consuming below your signal, staying consistent, letting compounding work in silence for years, nobody's watching. The distance between Maria and Walter isn't as fixed as it looks from the outside. It's just further than most people are willing to walk. Maria is still in line, number 47. The screen still says 31. She doesn't know that 60 feet away, a private door just opened for a man with a coffee order memorized by a stranger who gets paid to know it. She doesn't need to know. Knowing doesn't change her number. What changes her number is exactly what changed it for Priya, for James, for Angela, for Richard, for Walter, none of whom started behind that unmarked door either. Every one of them, at some point, stood exactly where Maria is standing right now. If this video showed you a side of banking nobody explains, hit subscribe. And tell me in the comments, which rung are you standing on right now? Not the one you want to be on, the real one. Because the only way to climb a ladder is to know, honestly, which rung your feet are actually on.